Hello and welcome to the part 2 of our portrait drawing lesson. So we've drawn our very nice schematic. I'm sure that you've all done very well with that. Measured it out and you end up with something looking like this. So I'm going to draw a portrait of myself. I've taken a selfie. Here we go, I've put it on my iPad for me to have a look at. It took me a few goes to get one that was me exactly in the center, and I took this from quite a distance and then cropped it later so that it wasn't too distorted. If you get the camera lens too close to your face, your nose ends up looking much bigger than it really is. Things like that. So try and distance it a little bit and then crop it afterwards. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be doing is just getting rid of some of these construction lines. Take my eraser and clean up my schematic a little bit so that it's ready for turning into the portrait. Okay, I got rid of all the construction lines and I'm going to start looking at the shapes and trying to imitate the shapes of my face. I like to start out with the bigger shapes, so we're going to be carefully looking at the shape of the chin and this around. Look at the jawline very carefully. I notice that I have a kind of curved corner just above the level of the mouth, and then it comes more straight into quite a pointy chin. So I'm going to take this line a little bit out and then shave a little bit off over here and make this a little bit more pointy, and the same on the other side, of course. And you'll notice by just changing that shape of the face ever so slightly, it really changes the drawing quite a lot, and literally I have moved those lines maybe 2 millimeters. Then further up I notice that maybe my face is a little bit thinner than this schematic, and so I shave a little bit off on the sides. And again I rub out the original schematic line a little bit. And so you can see by just changing it ever so slightly, it really changes the look of the face quite a lot. My mouth, my lips are very thin. I'm just going to change those. And maybe this curve is slightly less. While a normal eraser is quite good for these purposes, you might want to find one of these, which is a moldable eraser, which kind of you can dab and make the lines lighter without smudging anything and make it easier to redraw them. So this is quite a useful tool for drawing, as well as maybe some darker pencils where you can make your shading a whole lot easier. Okay, then I look at the nose, take a careful look, and I see, whoa, my nose is much bigger than what I have done in the schematic. So I'm going to change that by bringing it down, making the end a little bit more square like my nose. removing the original lines a little bit, and I'm going to make the sides of my nose a little bit thinner, take those sides in a bit. Up to the eyebrows, I'm going to change the shape of those slightly. I notice that mine are quite close to the eyes. I'm going to bring the bottom down a little bit and very carefully watch the curve. Of course, everyone's eyebrows are different. You need to look at your reference. I really prefer to look in the mirror for these things actually, but seeing as I'm presuming most of you will just take a selfie and be looking at your phone, then I thought I would do the same as you. Mine come out to about here. Maybe they don't curve down so much. And the other side too. And looking more closely at the eyes, this seems to be more or less correct, but maybe the shadow needs to come down there, and I have clearly made the eyes too big. So I'm going to take some of that off there and change that ever so slightly. And making the iris a little bit smaller. But making sure that it would be a round circle. My pupil would be more here, but of course it's very dark. I will come back and shade that in just now. Okay, then I look carefully at my ears. Again, these just need to be corrected ever so slightly. Of course, the camera has distorted my ears and kind of made them look smaller because they are further back. But I will just go with what I see. And coming in. And I remove the original line. Notice how I'm not really moving anything up and down, I'm just changing the shapes of the features to kind of approximate what I look like a little bit more. Again, I look at the shape of the face and I notice that maybe it's a little bit wide. Okay, now it comes to the hair. I'm sure that most of you have a lot more hair than me, and maybe your hairline might even be slightly lower than this. You just have to look very carefully at the shapes, etc. So my hairline has moved back over the years, and I have a very nice short haircut at the moment as well, so I maybe don't have this much hair on the top, and I certainly don't have this much hair down below the line of the skull, so I'm going to adjust that Okay, and so already it's starting to look a little bit more like my reference and a little bit more like me. Change these shapes ever so slightly. Okay. Also with the photograph, my neck has been, the length of my neck has been changed somewhat, so I'm also going to look at that and just put in actually what I see. So my hoodie comes to just here, then I try and draw what I see. I'm going to put in some marks where my shadows are going to come, so I'm preparing for my bit of shading that I'm going to be doing. I notice that there's some dark mouth lines here showing my mouth structure, and at first I just start out very lightly putting these things in where the shadows actually come in. The light is coming from above in my photograph, so underneath here is a little bit darker, etc. And I start slowly to shade in the part, make some pieces darker, look carefully at the eye, and change that line ever so slightly. And I'm going to put in a little bit of the beard just as a texture in the beginning. So you just have to carefully observe what you see. I'm going to add in a little bit extra at the bottom here for my beard. And there are some shadows happening at the corner of the mouth. And if you have taken your photograph with the light coming from above, then of course we have some shadows here in the lips. So I'm going to darken that line. And the top lip a bit. And so as we shade, you want to give the drawing a little bit more form, really. And just observe what's actually there and try to imitate what you see. I have very dark eyes, so I'm just going to make them very dark. Even the whites of the eyes require a little bit of shading. And the double line. going to adjust here ever so slightly. Often the very bottom of the eye, just on the bottom eyelid, is actually highlight if you look very carefully. So if you shade just below it, it kind of brings that out. Now I need to try and make the form of the nose by adding in the shadows. Now as you can see, the light in my photograph is coming from this side in, and so of course this side of the nose is slightly darker, and so I just lightly start to shade that and try and get some form going in there, and spread that shadow down a bit. And I carefully look at my photograph, and I also notice that just on the bridge of the nose the shadow comes down, and I can shade that in a little bit. Also helps the nose stand out a bit, and I start to put some more details in the shape of the nose, the shadow underneath a little bit. You will notice that there is a reflection on the edge of the nose. I also want to try and get that. Of course that will require me darkening underneath. And the darker shadow next to the nose will also help give it form. And so I spread that shadow out a bit. The cheek, I start to add a little bit of shadow here. You can shade in any direction you want. Just try and keep it light at first, looking carefully at your reference all the time to try and work out where the shadows actually are. And you will notice I work a little bit here and then a little bit on the other side, and try and work at the drawing all at the same time, all over, little bit by little bit, and you will slowly start to improve on your shading technique and observation. And just very lightly, and you kind of build up the shadow little bit by little bit, and it starts to look a bit more realistic. Often when you want something to appear lighter, then you need to shade the area next to that piece so that it does appear lighter. Like here, I want my nose to appear lighter, so I'm going to shade just next to the nose. Also the beard, or my chin, I want to appear lighter, so I actually shade the area below and kind of spread that shadow out a bit so that it appears lighter. If you don't like the rough look of the pencil shading, then it's better to try and smooth it with your pencil. But you can of course take your finger and do the smudgy thing, although it often ends up making the picture look a little bit grey. Do not smudge into and make your picture all grey all over. If you want to do this, then just try and do it a little bit. Now I'm just getting more of the shape of the mouth. You will notice that I bring out the bottom lip by shading just underneath it. And darkening the mouth and little shadow corners as well. Okay, now I'm going to move up to the forehead. Even though the forehead is kind of smooth, I have some wrinkles, of course. Hopefully you guys haven't quite got that to that stage yet, but I'm going to shade in some small amount of shadows just to give this some roundness. If I actually start to analyze it, this is much lighter over here, and so I'm going to just give this a little bit of tone around the edges. And some details here again, mostly to do with my wrinkles. Around the eyes, of course. Okay, now I'm going to tone the hair a little bit. It's a good idea just to do this in the direction of the hair. Okay, so now I also notice that possibly either I have not made my nose long enough or the mouth should be moved slightly up. So I'm going to adjust that. And again, coming back to the hair a little bit, adding some slightly darker tone to it. And then the more subtle shadows on the nose. As you see, you go back to shadows and you can work in more details as you go along. I really don't expect you guys to go to this much detail, but of course if you want to, please do so. But as long as you have some shading in your portrait to give it a bit of form. Okay, so now I've added in quite a lot of detail. I'm working into my shadows. Okay, and then as a final touch to the drawing, I decided to add a nice blue background and then the complementary color orange for my hoodie to make each other seem nice and brighter. And that is my finished drawing.